going to North Philly.
You feeling like you're sticking out?
I'm in West Philly, so I'm moving to West Philly. So.
Yeah.
I'm back at the classical.
Yeah, it's a good thing to check out. And you just figure out if you can do it or not, right? It tells you. Yeah, we need to get on that.
Everybody here can count to 3.
One.
No, you know exactly. There's 1. Okay, I can keep talking now. There's 2. All right, I better stick to it. 3. Okay, I have a bet until the bell rings.
And everybody's got. We're well trained.
Yes,
Sort
we're
of.
well trained,
Sort of well trained.
delightfully trained. Right. So, any questions you have, please feel free to ask them, but keep them simple.
For the theme.
For the, no. Any questions at all, but just a reminder of the theme.
I was like really tired the Sunday before this, I believe, and so it reminded me a lot of my meditation practice significantly when I started meditating, which was like, it'll kind of put me in it feels sort of pointless, like I go into some state where it's just like heavy mental thinking, heavy, you know? And then this week, I could tell that I was tired, and so instead of just doing that, I felt like keeping my mind like almost intentionally like active, just so that it wouldn't. It was hard to know like where to keep my mind when nothing really felt right. Like when I'm well rested, there's a kind of settling that I can expect from my mind, and that's easier to work with. But when I'm tired and when I've got caffeine going or like anything, it's like I wasn't really sure how to make the best use of the time. I don't tend to meditate when I'm even a little bit tired these days, because I do it like a thinking practice as opposed to like a focus something.
Yeah.
That was vague. You don't have to answer that. We can do something else. I just was curious.
You know, it's a good question. So my question in return is, when you're dying, do you think you'll be feeling alert and chipper?
Yeah.
Good on you.
That's a really, really good point. Like I was reading, like we're so attached to having a sense of orientation in our mental space. You know, and it's like if one thing is off, we don't know how to think or orient ourselves. Like if yeah. So I hear you. Yeah.
So when we're really exhausted and, or any other time when we think that our meditation is just crap, to use the colloquial term, we actually have an opportunity in the midst of that to just see what that experience is. And this is part of the approach of simplicity. It's actually, all of those experiences are opportunities, and we'll find that we've reached into our pocket and pulled out the yardstick of some ordinary expectation and say, well, yeah, I kind of tried to meditate while I was falling over sleepy, and then we'll fill it in with whatever the markings are on our personal yardstick for good meditation or okay meditation or vaguely passable meditation or utterly beyond the pale failure. So we'll mark it in that way, but those are all opportunities. They are 100% gold. They're 100% gold. And then you have to be willing to kind of, with some bravado, run the experiment of what it's like to cultivate some kind of awareness, some kind of attention to bringing sort of, even if it's sort of just like an occasional lunge with a sort of the needle of a lunge in the direction of kind of connecting to your experience as your awareness falls apart and you go back to sleep. But just doing that in that state is really important. It's really important because we're not going to feel chipper when we're dying. We tend not to be all centered when emotions are sweeping through us with all kinds of things. But this is really this is really important to approach these kinds of experiences with kind of this very simple-minded, no expectation perspective. And then it's possible to kind of collect a little energy to just dive right into the experience. It's important. And then you start to feel, if you have even like the smallest little connection to something about your experience in those kinds of inconvenient states, then go, ooh, okay. And then you dedicate. May this one little connection with my experience, may it actually be the seed for deeper connection. May it be the seed for some flash of awareness while I'm dying. May it be the seed for some flash of awareness and recognition while I'm in the bardo. May it be the seed for some basis for compassion to arise in the midst of some heated circumstance.
It's hard to put away the yardstick. I'm just thinking that it's, no, it's interesting. You make a really interesting point. Because when I end a good session, it's like, okay, knocked it out of the power part, man. Holy criminy, huge progress there. I mean, I don't let it go. That's the thing. It's like
Dedicate.
When things when it's a hard session, it's like I dedicate. It's like, okay, there we go. Good work, but it's harder to let go. It's easier to like not do the same with a good session, to say, okay, that was that, and I'm moving on.
Yeah, the yardstick. It's kind of like you remember Dr. Strangelove? It's kind of like it's got this hand that's kind of beyond control. We're like that. We got the yardstick at home. I know I'm not supposed to be waving at you. But that in and of itself is kind of, there's another one, pure gold.
Another opportunity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pure gold.
At the same time, as all that is so true, part of Laura's question, when do you decide that you'll do some contemplative instead, in a session? And it's really interesting here because we've talked about this before, but pretty much every book over there that will tell you about starting out with Shine will say 3 minutes. 3 minutes, very alert, very focused, then rest or something else. And we don't do that because we're under conditions where, we say goodbye after 3 minutes, come back next Sunday. So, but I find myself, really sticking with the Shine as much as possible, the calm abiding. And then, let's say on a day I don't drink coffee, but I'll use that because you mentioned it. A day you drank a lot of coffee before you got here, and you're just going, you know, you might want to then choose. Now here's the tricky part. I'm choosing to move off of calm abiding, and I'm choosing now to do loving kindness toward myself, or Tonglin towards all those who are flipped out on caffeine right now, or, you know, whatever. And then what I think, in my experience, I'm finding, once that contemplative thing calms you, which it can seem to do, especially if you put the bodhicitta in it, like the Tonglin or for everyone, a sort of calm can come, and then back to the shine. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you can use those in that way.
So can you do
Because-
that in the session? Because sometimes they
Yes.
tell you that
Use
you should
what?
keep only one type of meditation in one single session. I'm just asking.
Well, that's my point. My point is, they are setting out options, but all of them say you're the one that knows your experience. You're the one that knows your mind. So, for example, for me to go, well, this is only shine, and my shine's gone to hell in a handbasket, but I will shine.
I
It's
agree
that.
with you. I totally agree.
It's that place, you know, and then I may need to say, actually, I think if I just move off of it for 3 minutes, try some metta, some loving kindness, see what happens. Or stop trying.
I was actually going to say
Just stop trying, because
yeah.
shine's not a trying thing anyway, but we all have such trying habits. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, the more I think about what shine should be, or think about, okay, I'm going to engage in shine, the more I have that thought, the less of anything that feels calm and abiding actually happens. And I feel like I almost have to reverse psychology myself and just do the just sit, like sort of the non-abiding just sit, eyes open.
Whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
What?
Which is shine.
Yeah.
But maybe when you quit calling it that, then you get closer.
That's what
you
it- that's
know?
what- yeah,
I think that's
it
why they
takes.
have that funny saying, don't try to meditate. You know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
when I first ran onto that, I thought it was very funny, but now I see how useful it is. You know,
It's
Even beyond, don't
no.
try to meditate, don't meditate.
yeah, don't meditate. Yeah, that's right. It's don't meditate.
Yeah.
It's like, what am I doing here?
'Cause, I mean, if I tried to meditate, if I tried to set myself up into like, okay, I'm not on caffeine today, good. I'm not tired today, good. Like, if I tried to set it up in that way of like, of these conditions are required, I'm never gonna meditate. Like, if I even just like saying, for me, even just saying, I can't meditate. Like, if I only meditated when I wasn't tired, I would never meditate, ever. So I'm just gonna have to meditate when I'm tired,
Hmm.
because I am.
Yeah.
I always get energy from sitting. It'll totally replace some of my sleep. And so I find myself having to pull myself out of it when I'm there in the mornings and stuff. And I know that I've only gotten 4 hours of sleep. I'm just like, well, do it. Just go for it. It's awesome. I don't know. Then it gives me energy until midday, and then I have to do it again, and then it'll carry me through work, and then I'm just like, okay, now it's Star Trek time.
Yeah.
All these circumstances are very individual. And my kind of polemical take on it to start out with is not intended as some kind of moral injunction, but more encouragement to really kind of have some bravado about meeting circumstances. But the same kind of principle of, in a certain way, the principle of meditate for 3 minutes applies even more so in these difficult circumstances. Because it's even more like meditate for 2.5 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really, because that's really what it is. It's now. Now look, not like set up some kind of strategy to kind of deal with something for a while.
An action can be.
It's not that at all. It's just kind of a this moment and this moment and this moment, being actually able to meet that. So I very much encourage everyone to try that out in these circumstances that seem counter ideal. But that said, in general, it's best to have an overall pattern of trying to find circumstances that are somewhat supportive for your practice. A place that's free of most distractions, and turn the television off while be in a room where other people aren't having a conversation. Just all the basic things to set things up that are going to provide some support. Those things are important, and to give yourself sort of a leg up to do things when you feel more fresh. Yeah, all those things are important. But my encouragement is really more about just don't overlook the opportunity in these more challenging circumstances.
The question of like when to like if there's a distraction in an environment, when to get up and change that versus use it. Like when.
Like what do you mean?
Yeah, anything.
You have to give me an example.
Like the heater running, and there's like you're feeling distracted by the sound of the fan going. Get up and turn the fan off, or just like use it.
Get over
Yeah.
Get over it.
Yeah. Just use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing if your alarm clock you've set it 12 hours off, and now it's going.
No, don't get up and turn it off. Just let it go.
Go insane.
Yeah, you could go with that too, but it's not. You have to be kind of reasonable about it.
Yeah.
In the one-year retreat, Eric Trebelhorn came and talked one time with us, and I just memorized this one quick thing about sound, which helps a lot. He said, just for a nanosecond, ask for yourself, is that sound inside my mind or outside? Then just drop it. You just ask that. You don't try and sit and figure it out, but you instantly get this sense of, I don't know.
Yeah.
And therefore, it becomes less.
I've just been reading this book. I think it's on the 4 Immeasurables. I forget what the name of it is. Boundless Heart, maybe, by Ken McLeod.
Or by Alan Wallace.
Alan Wallace, that's right. And he talks about mastering calm abiding in that book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And there's all these circumstances that he talks about, like you should establish in order to master calm abiding. Like as such as have like a vista that you look out onto in order to like provide these type of circumstances where you could master calm abiding. And I always kind of wondered about that. Well, going around trying to establish the exact correct circumstances to master something, and then even on top of that, when to like even focus on mastering one practice versus bringing other practices into that. So I don't know if that's really a question, but I guess the circumstance piece is really what I'm wondering about. He goes into so much detail about that, but I'm like, well, how much do I worry about that? Yeah.
The last part's easy, about how much should I worry. Don't worry.
Oh, don't worry at all. Yeah, okay, gotcha.
The rest of it is a little bit more subtle. If you were close to Alan Wallace and were working with him, then, and you had a question about it, then I would say you should ask Alan Wallace. Kind of, in my certain circumstances, this really an important thing. Some of these things can sound like thou shalt, like there is the right way to do it, and then you get very tied up in knots, and you just about get it figured out. You just about get you've got the vista now. You've got the this, and then you pick up the next book, and then you find you have the wrong vista.
Right.
Yeah, never have a vista.
Yes, never
Look at
have
a
vista.
wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the caveat in those things.
How does it mean? Like, is it a vista of your mind, or is
No.
it
No, like a
Actual-
scene, like don't meditate in front of like a brick wall kind of thing.
Not like you can
Like
look at distance.
actually have like some expansive that you can see a certain length of, you know.
that also kind of infers some sort of privilege a little bit?
Oh yeah.
Definitely. Sort of like
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
like, oh, I have
But-
a resort I can go to anytime.
You're talking about ideal circumstances, kind of, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
Alan is an awesome. He's really made. He's really is an expert on the practice of calm abiding, on shamatha practice. He did a whole like PhD study of it. He did a lot of practice. He did a lot. You know. So I really respect that, and he also at a shamatha retreat that we were at with him, he did mention that the Tibetan teachers tend to be less strict or less strong on sort of getting a long ways with shamatha.
As a separate practice.
As a separate practice, and he did, and Alan reported, I believe that he gave us some examples of what some of the great teachers have said, where it sounds like you could ask the question, well, should I do some of the more, the Vajrayana kind of Tibetan practices after I get a long ways with shamatha, or should I, yeah. And he had quotes, I think, that kind of teachers that said the opposite thing, like that you could do it either way, really, that they help each other. And some of the teachers would say, do your foundational practices, and then the shamatha will be easier, but it's also true that if you do the shamatha, then and so they really are accomplishing this. I mean, that's the same you are doing in a lot of the Vajrayana practices. You are doing things that enhance shamatha at the same time as you're doing maybe some other things. But he has just made that more of it's just sort of an area of his expertise, and that he does find it's really valuable. So if somebody's drawn to, but I think it's good for all of us to, let's say, have a little injection of like taking it seriously, like not just sort of putting in our time, and sort of, but actually, like, there is something to be.
It's like the salad days of shamatha.
There is progress to be had, even though we say like don't get obsessed with like making progress. But on the other hand, sort of having some diligence, having some discipline, following some of his recommendations if you can or when you can, and and people who study with him or go to. He has like 3-month retreats that he leads, and really trying to help people get some practice under their belt. And then some of those people do adopt the personal inspiration, you know, they have the inspiration and they have the kind of a personal mission that I'm gonna go farther with this, and then they seek out like conditions like that where they can really go for it in a bigger way, and I think that's great. So it doesn't mean that we all, it's like Bill said, it's not like, well, then we should feel bad about what we're doing, or we should, you know, whatever. But I think it's good to feel happy that some people are really moving with that, and that doesn't mean that that's kind of what we all should emphasize for ourselves, because maybe we get a lot out of, you know, the way we're practicing with other practices, or anyway. I think but I think the things that he says are very well founded and very thought through. He's and yet it's a different approach than sort of has happened with a lot of the Tibetan teachers.
It's kind of his area of focus.
Yeah, that's one of the areas of focus.
So what I found for myself is that there are a lot of things that I understand now in some ways, and in a couple of years I understand them differently. So let's see, I read him a lot and I really like him. And as she says, kind of hard to say I can do it exactly as he teaches you, but there's pieces of it that are very useful for me. And I adopt them. And then after a couple of years, there are other pieces that I adopt them, and they kind of make sense. Because it's like a form of maturing my way of doing shamatha, or doing, you know, the meditation. And little by little, I kind of become an expert in my own way of trying to get this to some good place of feeling that's not giving me points. Okay.
Part of it is I'm trying to figure out which practices like suit my particular like mental constitution. Whether I should, I don't know, how much time to spend on shamatha versus how much time to spend on other practices and that. So, but I think that's just something I need to contemplate more. I don't know if there's an answer for that.
I think some of the keywords you're using to figure it out, and almost like you want to know ahead of experimenting,
Right.
and you can't.
Right.
So all the figuring out, and maybe you mean it, this, is you need to just experience,
Right.
try it out. You know, like this week I'll do nothing but shamatha, you know, with my refuge and dedication, because you always want those bookends. But, or this week I won't do any, I'll just do the 4 immeasurables, you know, you just see what works for you. You know, it's, I just think, you know, we come back to this over and over, and this isn't just you, but it's something all of us, we just have these expectations of how the little bit we're really able to do in a busy lay life, like somehow we should be catapulted or something. I mean, you know, I mean, there's reasons that, for example, in the mind training, it says seek solitude, you know. I mean, to really make progress, you've got to do retreats. You've got to get out of this maelstrom of stuff that's going on, you know, where we're all on the bus with those little rectangles doing this stuff. And, you know, I mean, it's just not realistic. Or we're drinking coffee, or we're having work that's just so exhausting. You know, it's wonderful what we do get to and done. I just encourage all of us, including me, to more rejoicing in what we get done and less looking at what we don't get done. And at one point I had to stop reading all those kind of books. I read so many of them, just like Bill was saying, you know, then this book says, you know, really hone in and focus like you're carrying boiling oil, and it's right at the top, and you will be killed if a drop falls. That was one of Trala Rinpoche's. And I like it. I use that one every once in a while. You want to get that intense, you know. You want to, like, I'm going to get my head cut off if I don't, you know, get my awareness right there. But then he says, for about a minute, then something more relaxed, then, you know, working it, like, go. But I just think we're totally unrealistic given our circumstances.
Right.
And then, of course, you know, there's the old Montana thing of the highway. And so that's one ditch. You can be unrealistic about expectations, but you can fall in the other ditch like, okay, so I'll just put in my time and
Or
be
even
here
go as
20
far as like,
minutes.
no effort.
So the laziness can come, the confused laziness. And we just have to keep working it and be happy with what we get, you know. Like when you said, you know, okay, crappy session, but good enough sport. But maybe without the sarcasm towards oneself.
Who would I be without that?
So, you know, I mean, really encouraging ourselves, saying, good, I got to the cushion today for 5 minutes, and I fell asleep the whole time. Fine, that was good. I dedicate. You know, like we need to get like that. And someone I was talking to recently said that they've been going to Sally and Jeff's class, and one of the interesting things there was they were encouraged to set a low bar. Set a low bar when you're going to do your meditation. And she has found that so helpful at cutting against this thing that especially Matthew was talking about, you know, where the bar's too high and we're just freaking out. But set a low bar meaning, you know, I'll do 3 minutes, and then if you do 6, but you do them every day, you're like, wow, cool. I was only going to do 3, I'm doing 6. And she felt some sense of success for the first time in that way. So, you know, that's working for her.
Question. And it kind of, Alan Wallace, the dude. I started reading his Genuine Happiness book, and of course I got anxious when he said something about, well, calm abiding is great, but true liberation doesn't happen without the 4 applications of mindfulness. And I'm like, what is that? Are they separate? Are they kind of infused with each other? Like what?
What's the day that's separate? Shamatha and the 4 foundations?
Yeah, are they, or are they kind of the same? Because I assume when you sit down in calm abiding, you check your body, check your feelings, sensations, mental activity. But I think the way he's talking about it, they're different.
It's, yeah. In a certain way, I would re-gloss what he says to say, calm abiding without insight practice is incomplete. And the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or the 4 close applications of mindfulness, can be approached either as calm abiding, using each of the domains of experience, and the four foundations as a place to rest the mind, so particularly sensations of the body. Just resting the attention on the experience of the breath moving. You could say that's close application of mindfulness to the body. But the dimension of insight practice that starts to emerge as you do that, first is just some sense of recognizing that I have these domains of experience. They're not sort of one sort of glued together reality. And even within the domain of sensory experience. What I hear, if I see your lips going like that, and then I hear something, those are not one thing. They leave a synthetic impression in my mind. But if I really attend to my experience, they're not an identical experience. They're two different domains of experience. And in the same way, the thoughts that I have, they're like, oh, that's an interesting question, or that's a challenging question, or I didn't quite get that. Oh, that reminds me of all the other times I didn't quite get it. That all gets kind of bundled together, and it's unpleasant to feel like I'm being reminded of not having gotten things in the past, and now I'm not getting it again. All that stuff gets kind of mushed together, and just the process of cultivating the ability to let the mind, the attention rest in the different domains of experience opens up our sense of, oh, there was this unexamined sense of reality, this kind of glued together autopilot. It's actually much more fascinating than that. So it opens up. There's a kind of initially it's kind of a deconstruction. And in that deconstruction we can find, if we're able in the midst, this is a very, very common example that we often give it, if we're in the midst of some very strong turmoil and we can attend just to the domain of physical experience and just attend to that, then we find, actually, I'm not trapped by the stories that kind of add momentum to this experience of turmoil. So, I sort of it's kind of a case study, demonstration that liberation is actually possible. Because the thing that I found that trapped me, that was glued together, the glue actually doesn't exist. So that's kind of the opening edge of insight. And then as we're able to rest our attention more deeply into each aspect of experience, the nature of that experience itself starts to open up, and the nature of awareness itself starts to open up. And that's kind of the progression. So it's very true that calm abiding by itself does not produce liberation. But it's also very true that if we cultivate calm abiding, degrees of insight start to naturally arise. Just because we find little things like, oh, this physical sensation is not the same thing as the story that I'm telling myself. Something opens up. So I think it's really important not to have a sense that sort of insight and shamatha are these very distant things, and they're very unrelated. They're actually they kind of naturally and organically operate. That said, it's good as our meditation path starts to stabilize some, then it's good to kind of lean in the direction of kind of adding kind of a little more intention to the practice of insight. Kind of set things up for more discoveries. Kind of you can lean into it, and that's very good to do with whoever your meditation mentor is. That's really that's the best place for that. Either that, or you do some kind of retreat with somebody that you inspired to do retreat with, and these things will open up.
It's also a point that we say that you need both of the calm abiding and insight. That doesn't mean you need to be doing them both at the same time all the time, or else
Yeah.
you're doing the wrong thing. It's like in your path, your whole path, you need those both to become, to achieve full Buddhahood. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be totally worthwhile to just practice shamatha for 3 years or 5 years, without necessarily doing, I'm not saying a time on it, but just that when we say that you need these both, it doesn't mean like, oh, I should be doing that in every session. I should be doing that. So, but as Bill's saying, if you have, and one of the main points is, and why we start with calm abiding is because we can't develop insight if we can't pay attention. If our attention's just going all over like that, and we can't rest it on anything, it's not possible for insight to really develop. And so we start with shamatha, but when at a certain point, as Bill said, it's good to add in some practice of insight.
Can I just really quick though, but the 4 foundations of mindfulness there's very specific instructions on those, and it's actually from a different, isn't it like a Theravadan practice versus, it's
Not versus.
not versus, but it's
First turning.
I guess I was just trying to attend to her, just the distinction that you were getting out of that there was a distinction between them, and in a sense that the way that they're taught, they're kind of, right? They're shamatha as a practice and the 4 foundations of mindfulness as a practice. That's right?
You could separate it like that, but also if you just look at the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you go like, well, that's shamatha using this as an object, or that as an object.
I get that, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
just kind of like, yes, you're right. She's right that she was noticing this language thing around the 2 types of approaching it or something.
And it's worth getting instructions in the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
And don't we have a
as practice.
CD, you said before?
Yeah.
Or
Well, we have a CD that has, because we had a 4 Foundations of Mindfulness retreat with Alan Wallace that we sponsored and had some years ago. And we made from that actually the whole retreat is probably recorded, and we might have that. But we made a CD of guided meditations from that retreat, which is awesome.
Are they in
It's
the
like
bookstore?
30. Actually, we're out of those, and the bookstore people, I told them, and they said, "Oh, how do we get those?" So I don't remember who made them. I have to figure out who copied them and stuff. But they're available. I have a CD that just could be copied again, and that's really he leads his 3 types of shamatha, which he's, I think, stuck with for many years, and then a bunch of guided sessions on the different of the 4 foundations. Lots of them are on the body, of different aspects of the body, and then the other 3. They're just, I find it just really helpful to have, because otherwise I'm like, I'm using his book and then reading.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to just have that.
We should have that back. It's like, I agree with you. I was trying to read the book as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe
I
someone
love
can
his
take on working with Dora and the bookstore people and getting
Yeah.
if you really want to have it happen, just need somebody to
There's some
say,
other people
I'll
who are
help
asking
make it
for it
happen.
too, so we do need more copies of it. Great resource.
Now you have to do it a 3rd time because
Sorry.
we have, okay, now we know that we need to stop.
It's just that there was these wires.
Wasn't sure what to do next.
Yeah,
The third
we
one
were stuck
happened.
between
Oh,
2
I'm good
and
now.
3. Talk about ritual.
All right, so let us dedicate.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful discussion. Thanks for joining us.